Hello and welcome back. Before I begin, I have some new subscribers to thank. So big thank you to Live Love Learn 2008, Snowfire 7, Schnagelcott, KSM Red 2, Sabrina Bear 4, and Let Me Log In 90. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your taking the time to subscribe. And now, on with the haul. This week I just got so much stuff. I think I was just feeling really angsty because I actually meant to go to the book thing last week. I go the last weekend of every month, but we had a hurricane, so I couldn't go. And I think I just had all this pent-up book acquisition energy, and I got a lot of stuff. So without further ado, I'd better get to it. First, I got The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I'm not a big McCarthy fan. I've never actually made it through any one of his books. But I have a friend whose taste I really trust absolutely implicitly, and he said he enjoyed The Road, so I figured I'll give it a try. I'm not really that much into the post-apocalyptic thing, but we shall see, and of course I have the terrible movie edition cover as well, but what can I say? Then I got this novel, The Encounter by Crawford Power. I've heard of neither the book nor the author, but it is published by these Avon Bard editions, which I think they were mostly in the 60s and 70s they were published. They tend to just pick really interesting books from all over the world, and if it's in that edition, I figure it's worth looking at. Then I got A Maggot by John Fowles. You may remember in my last haul I mentioned that I had read Fowles' The Collector and was now really interested in reading pretty much everything he'd ever written, so adding to the collection here. And then Kingsley Amis, The Folks That Live on the Hill. Oddly enough, a good long time ago, maybe even 10 years ago at this point, I read Kingsley Amis's most famous novel, Lucky Jim, and I really did not like it. I now wish I had held on to it so I could take a look at it and see just what it was I hated so much about it. But I really did not like that. And then a few months ago, I read a few of his poems in an anthology and really liked the poems. And then I found one of his novels, Girl 20, at the book thing again, and really, really liked it. So I'm trying to give him another chance, so I picked up another one of his novels. And then I got Deep River by Shusaku Endo. This, Endo is a quite well-known Japanese writer, and I just read one of his novels called Scandal, which was so good and really, really scary. But I think that may have been a little atypical of him. He tends to write a lot about spirituality and the spiritual life, and that one was more of a horror tale about doppelgangers, but it made me curious to try the rest of his work. Then I picked up a collection of the dramas of John Ford. I'd read two of his plays before, 'Tis Pity She's a Whore and The Broken Heart, and looking forward to reading some more of these. I think this is his complete works. It has those two and The Lover's Melancholy, Love's Sacrifice, and Perkin Warbeck. And then I got, let's see, here we go. I got the last two novels in William Faulkner's Snopes trilogy. I already have the first one, The Hamlet. And then I got The Mansion and The Town. And this is Balancing Acts, Contemporary Stories by Russian Women. Oh, I was so incredibly excited to find this. This is a novel called Sissy by John A. Williams. And John A. Williams wrote a novel I really, really liked called The Man Who Cried I Am. It was just such a cool book, and I think a little bit misadvertised. It made it look like it was really kind of a thriller, and it turned out to be more of almost a reflection on growing older and you know, still trying to be a force in the world, but kind of, you know, the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak. But a really interesting book. I highly recommend it. And then he wrote a highly anthologized story called Sun in the Afternoon. That's Sun, S-O-N, in the afternoon, which I also thought was great. And I was sort of like, I know he must have written some other stuff, and apparently he has. So I found this one. So incredibly excited. And then I got this French novel by Françoise Mallet-Joris, Allegra. And Thomas Love Peacock's Nightmare Abbey and Crotchet Castle. Peacock, I've not read any of his work yet, but he wrote a lot of parodies of the very popular Gothic novels of the time, of which these are two. And another John Fowles novel, The Ebony Tower. Then I got Jack Kerouac's The Town and the City. This, I believe, was Kerouac's first novel, written before his very successful On the Road. I've never actually read anything by him at all, but I seem to remember hearing this one was not so good, but I'm just kind of curious about it. And then I got this biography of John Randolph, which was written by Henry Adams. And Henry Adams is one of my favorite nonfiction writers. I loved his autobiography, The Education of Henry Adams, and I read the first volume of his History of the United States. I read History of the United States during the administration of Jefferson. I haven't read the administration of Madison volume yet, but he's one of those people I would really love to read everything he wrote. And I didn't even realize he'd written this, so I was excited to find it. And then I got Norman Mailer's The Prisoner of Sex. Norman Mailer is just one of these writers who I often find really annoying, but for some reason I just feel the urge to read almost everything he writes. When he's good, he writes with such verve, and when he's bad, there's still usually something interesting you can pick out. And let's see, speaking of Norman Mailer, I also found his famous novel of World War II, The Naked and the Dead, in this great modern library edition. And a lot of the times when you find modern library books, they don't have the dust jacket, and this one even has the dust jacket, which is so cool. And interestingly enough, I saw the film version of this, and supposedly the novel was rather controversial, and I found the film pretty tame, so I'm curious to read the book and see how much they censored and changed when they made the film. And then I got this Memoirs of a Coxcomb by John Cleland, who is probably most famous as the author of Fanny Hill or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure. And I have that one sitting around. I haven't read it yet, but I hadn't even, this is again one of these books I hadn't even heard of, and I figured I should just pick it up. And another French book, Les Femmes d'Amis by Georges Courteline. And André Maurois' Histoire de la France. And this is pretty cool. This is Histoire du cinéma. This is the first volume of Cinéma Muet, or Silent Cinema. This is written by Maurice Bardèche. And this is an autobiography of Melina Mercouri, Je suis née grecque. And Melina Mercouri is perhaps best known as the star of Never on Sunday. She was in a lot of other films as well. And she was eventually married to the director Jules Dassin. And then I got Le Dieu des Corps by Jules Romain. Nice double-decker here by Guy Descartes, Le Grand Monde. So, 2 volumes. And, oh, so excited to find this. This is Vipère au Poing by Hervé Bazin, or Viper in the Fist. And Bazin is one of these writers whom I never would have discovered if I hadn't been going to this free book place, where I first found his novel La Tête contre les murs, or Head Against the Walls. I just really liked the title, brought it home, and wound up absolutely loving it. And I've read a couple of his other books since, which I haven't liked quite as much, but I've definitely liked them. And this, you may know if you've seen François Truffaut's Antoine Doinel films. This book gets name-checked in the short film Antoine et Colette when he's visiting her family. And let's see, Les Aristocrates by Michel de Saint-Pierre. Yeah, I really picked out on French books this time around. And this is Barefoot in Babylon, the creation of the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969 by Robert Stephen Spitz. And let's see. This is The Aquarian Conspiracy, Personal and Social Transformation in the 1980s by Marilyn Ferguson. The reason I picked this up is, you may remember in one of my previous hauls, I picked up a novel called Deserted Cities of the Heart by Louis Shiner. And that was actually one of those books I picked up on a complete whim, had never heard of it before. I read it and really liked it, and in the afterword to the novel, Shiner mentioned this as one of the books he'd read while he was doing research, so I figured I would take a look at it. And then I got a novel, The Unpossessed by Tess Schlesinger. And The Quest of the Silver Fleece by William E.B. Du Bois. And I had no idea that Du Bois had written a novel, but apparently he has. And then I got The 60s Papers, Documents of a Rebellious Decade by Judith Claver Albert and Stuart Edward Albert. And Life in the West by Brian Aldiss, who's a big writer in the English science fiction new wave. And this little thriller called Stiff by Shane Maloney. I had never heard of it, but I just picked it up and it looked kind of good. And then Soul Mountain by Gao Xingjian. This is the writer, the dissident Chinese writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I guess quite a while ago, but this was his big novel and I've always meant to read it, and now I have. Or now I have it, I haven't read it yet. And then I got A Part of Our Time, Some Monuments and Ruins of the 30s by Murray Kempton. And The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Yes, Chbosky, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And let's see, a novel, Speedboat by Renata Adler. And Going to Extremes by Joe McGinnis. This is apparently a portrait of Alaska. Era of Excess, A Social History of the Prohibition Movement by Andrew Sinclair. And 21 Dog Years, Doing Time at Amazon.com by Mike Daisy. 10,000 Light Years from Home by James Tiptree Jr., classic science fiction writer, who was actually a woman and took the name James Tiptree as a pseudonym. And this poetry anthology, The Naked Astronaut Poems on Birth and Birthdays, which just sounds so weird, but it's published by Faber and Faber, which made me curious. Stand on Zanzibar, science fiction novel by John Brunner. And Mary Lavelle by Kate O'Brien. The Smile of the Lamb by David Grossman, another novel. Barefoot in the Head by Brian Aldiss, another Aldiss novel. And last but not least, Four Plays by Calderon, who is one of the great dramatists of the Spanish Golden Age of theater. And if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for my next video.